San Diegans accomplish great things every day. We care about our neighbors and our community. We are proud of our diversity. We are resilient. We hold our leaders accountable. We live in one of the most dynamic cities in America, the San Diego Union-Tribune, telling San Diego's story for more than 150 years.
Hi, I'm Armantrout, and I'm happy to be here today with my old friend, Bob Perelman.
Hello.
We've known each other for decades, and we've often shared poems with each other, and we both have new books out. This is my new book. I'm going to start. Oh, well, okay. Yeah, there we go. It's called Conjure, and it's just out from Wesleyan. It's in both paperback and hardback. I lived in San Diego most of my life, grew up there, but I've recently moved to Seattle to be near my twin granddaughters. And the book, Conjure, has something to do with beginning to watch my granddaughters grow up in an increasingly toxic environment and world. And I mean toxic in every sense of that word. So I'm going to start. Well, the way we're going to do it is I'm going to read a poem and then Bob's going to ask me some questions. We get to ask each other questions, which is fun because we don't usually do that. So I'm going to read a poem and then he's going to ask me some questions about it. We'll do that for a while, then we'll take turns. It'll be his turn. Okay. Speculative fiction. The idea that producing a string of nonsense syllables while pointing toward an object may cause that object to change is common in children on the verge of language. The idea that force exists only as an interaction between objects, while an object is a kind of kink in a force field. The idea that if one survives X number of years, one will live to see how things turn out, or even that things end well. In the future, we will face new problems. How will we represent the variety of human types once all the large animals are gone? As sly as a mother? as hungry as an orphan?
Well, I don't. Oh, there I am. Okay. It's a great poem, as are many of your poems. This one strikes me that you're doing something that you often do with readers, is you present things that on first hearing or first glance look alike, that they belong in the same category, but in fact you're presenting very different patches of thought to readers. So in the beginning of the poem, you have 3 stanzas starting with the idea that.
Mm-hmm.
The first stanza, you've got the little children and the nonsense syllables. But then the second stanza, suddenly we're in the world of physics, and a very, very abstract, complex physics where force and objects seem to mutually create one another. And the third stanza, it's a very somber bit of common sense about human finitude, that the idea that if one survives X number of years, one will see how things turn out, or that things end well, and you put quotes around turn out and end well, suggesting that in fact we're not going to see how things turn out, and they may not end well. Anyway, to talk about how you like to play with almost teasing a reader with similarity and then bringing together very different things.
It's true that my poems often come in separate sections. This one has 4 sections, basically. And each of those sections has a different topic. It's pointing towards a different aspect of reality. But I would say that underneath that, all of the sections are doing the same thing. And what I mean is that they're examples of how thinking can run into dead ends, or can tie itself in knots, can run into conundrums, and even go astray. The first examples that you mentioned are, pretty innocent. The first one is about children acting like or believing words are magic, which, you could see how a kid would get that idea if they say ba, ba, and their mother hands them a ball. Well, words are magic. And as they get a bit older, well, you see that with the Harry Potter books too, right? The question is, do we ever outgrow that? Or is there still deep inside us the idea that words are magic? And, maybe in some ways they are, but probably not in every way. And then the physics part is a kind of paradox. Bob was pretty much quoting it, but it's 2 facts about physics, I think, that they're considered to be truths by physicists. I like to read, lay people's physics books. The first half of it's kind of Newtonian, the idea that force exists only as an interaction between objects, like one pool ball hits another and it goes in the pocket. We're all familiar with that. The other, I was reading something about quantum field theory, and it said, while an object is a kind of kink in a force field. I think I picked the word kink, but the rest of it is basically a quote from a book. But you put those 2 things together, it becomes a kind of chicken and the egg circle, right? You can't get out of that. Which came first, the force or the object? And then I'm not going to go through every one of them, but I do want to talk about the last one a little that you mentioned. I mean, it's really where the rubber meets the road, where it gets dark, because it's suddenly talking about mass extinctions. And the way we identify with animals, we all do, but especially thinking of children again. My granddaughters are much more interested in animals than they are in people, really. And they anthropomorphize them in ways that, we won't be able to relate animals to our psyche in the medium term future, really, when all of these animals we love so much are extinct, or so many of them are. And that's what the last stanza is focusing on, is what that's going to do to the human psyche. But what the speaker there is not seeing and not focusing on is what that's going to do to the whole world and to us. That is, once the world is so depleted, we're going to be in danger of death and starvation too. So that's also about how our thinking leads us into error, I guess.
The beginning of the poem is so domestic. I mean, you have an implied older person, grandmother type, looking at a little child in a crib, mouthing nonsense syllables, and by the end, you do have a scenario of mass extinction and what that will do to language. So it's, I would say that you, as a poet, you probably like being able to go from such different emotional valences in the same poem.
I do, and that sort of lures you into the poem, makes you feel comfortable, and then it takes you to the place I really want you to go often in this book, which is to look at what we're doing to the world.
We should probably, because of our timing, turn to the next one you're going to read.
Care. Care. Dress like you care. Eat like you care. Care like you care. You don't think apples just grow on trees, do you? A fish taps a clam against the bony knob of coral to crack its shell, which demonstrates intelligence, yes, but is the fish pleased with itself? Alone in your crib, you form syllables. Are you happy when one is like another? Add yourself to yourself. Now you have someone.
I have two basic questions I want to ask here. The first is about the you. At the beginning, especially the dress like you care, eat like you care with the exclamation point. That's an unusual tonality in your work. Talk about how that came to you and then what you do in the poem.
Well, first I'm going to just disagree with you a little bit and say that I don't think that's a totally unusual tonality. A lot of times I do voices in a almost like a ventriloquy, and often you can't quite trust the voices or like the voices. I mean, these are the voices that are around us in the air, right? So you have to kind of ask yourself, who might be saying that? And in the example that you gave, eat like you care, dress like you care. I mean, that could be a parent who's scolding you, or it could be a kind of self-help book. But, it's advice that's coming at you from the outside world and telling you that you're not quite measuring up, I guess. The third one, care like you care, is trickier, deliberately trickier. It's almost making fun of the first two, maybe, because care like you care, that's going to be a little hard to pull off. It requires a kind of metacognition, and it's just based on a simple repetition of adding care on top of care.
That brings me to my second question, which involves tautology or repetition, which I think is something that you're quite interested in. And so, for instance, in the last section of the poem, asking the child, "Are you happy when one syllable is like another?" The child is pleased with that repetition, but then you say, "Add yourself to yourself. Now you have someone." It almost is as if are those two yourselves there? Add yourself to yourself. Yeah. Are they the same? Yeah. Are they different? And then how do you get from yourself plus yourself equals someone?
I think that kind of adding is always basically based on division. First you have to split in two. You have to be able to look down on yourself and see yourself. And then you have someone. Once you can hear yourself think, you are already two. They may be the same, they may not. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it. But yeah, I am interested in tautology, and I don't really know why exactly. I just always have been. I think it again comes down to a chicken and the egg kind of problem, like I mentioned with the physics poem. The tautology that sticks in my mind is from early on is Jehovah speaking from the burning bush in the Old Testament, at least in the King James Version, and saying, I am that I am. I mean, that is just the simplest, most dramatic version of tautology. It's like nothing else needs to be said. These two things are equal. This self has no particular attributes that it wants to assert. It's just all reiteration. I am this reiteration. That being exists by doubling down, basically. But I think that's what I was saying, is that I think we all do. We all become human or become conscious by splitting and doubling. And I think that's kind of primitive tautology. And that's why I'm interested in it, I think.
Listen, there's much more to say about this, but I'm looking. I have a little clock,
okay. Yeah.
and we're running low on our 15 minutes. So, and I'd really like you to read and talk about the last poem we were fossils.
Fossils, yeah. Okay. Fossils. A raven marches straight down that pitched roof as if on a mission. Intention in birds or babies seems amusing. The guy walking down the main drag with his pack and bedroll has a clear purpose: to find some place more protected and claim it before nightfall. Not that I envy him. I don't mean that. I mean that the notions of my neighbors in these spruced up or dilapidated houses with their garden gnomes, stubby windmills, and crosses are the fossilized remains of his quest.
Well, here I'd like to ask you about your use of real-time observation. The raven marching down the pitched roof is something happens, in 2 seconds, and there you put it in your poem. Or the middle of the poem, the guy walking down the main drag. What happens when you decide to use something from real life? And does something different happen when it's a person and not, say, an animal or plant or landscape?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I decide to do it and then do it. It's just that for me anyway, poetry is a kind of based on real-time observation. And so the purpose isn't just to describe, but I notice things, and when those things strike me as somehow odd or interesting, or I don't quite understand them, I make a note of them. So that's how it starts. And I like to be able to leave a poem open to happenstance so that anything can come into it. But then the question is, once the things that have struck my attention, that were salient for me over the course of an afternoon, or maybe over the course of 2 days, so maybe that's several things, then how can those things relate to each other? How can they be related, and what kind of interactions can they have?
Well, for instance, here, a crow walking down a roof and a guy pushing a shopping cart are, on the surface, very different.
Yeah, and that again, and then again, I would say that underneath, I think the reason I put them in the same poem and kept the poem was that I found something similar going on, at least in my process. I was looking at them and they seemed intentional. They seemed like they were doing something on purpose. And the question for me was, do I know what? Do I understand what they're doing? How much can I relate to it? How much do I understand of what I see? I guess that was the question that really comes through, not just with the raven and the homeless man, but also with the lawn ornaments at the end. Why do people put those particular lawn ornaments out? And it's different in each case, but it's always that same sort of problem. I mean, with the raven, I wouldn't expect to know what was in the raven's mind, although it sure looked like something was. With the homeless man, I thought I could pretty much understand what his needs were, so what he was probably doing. One thing that was going on there is, I guess that day, I wasn't in a good mood. I was feeling kind of adrift. Maybe I had just recently left San Diego and moved up here to Everett. And I was, where am I kind of feeling? And then I see this guy who looks like he knows where he's going. And for just a flicker of a second, I went, oh, how nice to have a purpose. And then I thought, yeah, but I don't want to be that person.
Right.
And then I felt guilty about thinking that. So I'm going to rush through because I know we're running short on time. The end skips to objects, the people decorating their lawns with miniature windmills, and these are my new neighbors around here, and garden gnomes, which is common enough. But looking at them, I thought, well, those are emblems of home, which is what the homeless man was looking for. But why? Why a gnome? I don't know. So I guess it comes back again to do I feel like an outsider in the world, or to what extent can I enter into the world I see?
Okay. Well, great. I guess we have to switch over now, switch roles temporarily. So I am going to read from my new book, Jack and Jill in Troy, from Roof Books. And both my book and Ray's Conjure are available, but there's a link at the end of the broadcast that viewers can click to order from local bookstores. Okay, so Jack and Jill in Troy is, I would have to say, an unusual book in that it combines poems that are very loosely based on the Iliad, which I became quite enamored with. The power of various tableaux in it. That's one section of the book, and the other is coming from my being a grandparent and spending my wife and I, a bunch of time with our little kids as I was writing this book. So there's a lot of nursery rhymes in here too. And I think Ray and I are going to talk a little later about what happens when you try to put those two things together. I'm going to read two poems. My poems tend to be longer than Ray, so I'm just going to do two. The first one is Hera and Zeus at Home. And this is a somewhat kind of satiric retelling of a famous story in the Iliad, not famous to everybody, but it's called The Beguilement of Zeus. And Hera, his wife, who is also his sister and daughter in the Greek pantheon, is there temporarily on other sides in the Trojan War, and Zeus is helping the Trojans temporarily, and Hera is all for the Greeks. And she wants to stop Zeus from keeping charge of the battlefield, so she decides to seduce him with a hostile intent. But they are married after all. Anyway, that's the background. So here's the poem. Hera and Zeus at Home. At this point, Hera thought just how to get what she wanted. She'd aim all his pleasure right back at the father, brother, husband. She'd knock him off his vantage. His wishes were hateful to her. She'd wreck his plan. So she armored up with oils and other irresistibles. She'd already got hold of the love bead and went up the mountain and presented herself like some ingenue, first time in town, micro-fidgeting, hyper-compliant. As for him, never had he felt so alive, so on top of his game, not when he played badminton with Daphne, solitaire with Lydia, catch the drift with Sue, let's make a deal with Ray, post office with Dawn, rolled that perfect game with Sally. This was like the first time. Even better, it was right before the first time, which was finally going to happen. The cues worked to perfection. The ground literally grew flowers beneath them. The atmosphere candied into a golden fog, so no one outside could really see all that much of anything. Sleep crept out from the branches. Victory was hers, candy from a baby. Then afterwards, when things are a mess, his entire schedule's shot The beeper won't shut up. That's precisely when she gets to tell him, look, it was just sex. I swear on our marriage bed, don't start. The young know all this. They've been hearing it since forever. But they also know that if you've missed the latest, nothing you know is worth much. That's why screens are sacred and why it's almost physically impossible to look away. Miss something, you're screwed.
Yeah, screens are sacred now. Well, the first thing that I want to ask you about is the language, because I think a lot of people might think of epic poetry as being grand, and I'm not saying that Homer is this way, but almost grandiose, very serious. And your language here is, there are places where it seems like it might, I don't know, but might be close to the language of translation of the Iliad, like, the golden fog and swearing on the marriage bed. But there are lots of other places, like taking candy from a baby and don't start. Yeah. There are obviously very casual, contemporary phrases. And also your sentence structure is kind of loose, like no one outside could really see all that much of anything. So it's a pretty conversational, casual tone. And so do you want to talk about how you made that decision, if it was a decision, to write about this, classic, right through, I guess you should say, this classic work, and do it in this kind of loose, conversational, maybe even New York schooly, for those of you who know what that is, tone?
Yeah, well, on the one hand, you're right, and I certainly did want to keep things as plain spoken as this is a very unusual, bizarre material, but I wanted to keep things very plain spoken, as if it were real life. At the same time, I don't know what a single hearing sounds like to people, but for me, I worked rather obsessively on all the poems in this book, and there are many, many, many drafts. And for instance, that line you mentioned, the atmosphere candied into a golden fog, which is kind of from Homer, but so no one outside could really see all that much of anything. I remember working on that, and as I worked on it, I did the opposite of what you're supposed to do and what we trained to do, and I kept adding little bits of phrases. Could see all that much, and then I added of anything. So I made it more wordy, but what I was aiming for was the nuance of imagining people outside this magic golden fog where the primal scene between the Zeus and Hera is being enacted. That's the Freudian primal scene. And that the more you put little qualifiers, so no one outside could really see all that much of anything, but adding the really and of anything, I hope has a little tiny suggestion that, well, maybe you could just see a little tiny bit if or imagine you could see. So I was trying to, I guess, what do you say, eat my cake and have it too, use casual language exactly, if I can.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And yes, you are moving away from what they might teach in creative writing classes, to be as precise and as you can and condense. Condense,
yeah. And this is a sort of anti-condensed.
Right. But I want to move on to another question about the same poem. It's narrative most of the way through, of course, retelling this episode of the Iliad, and then it makes a startling turn at the end. I mean, you talked about some of my startling turns. Well, you do it too. So all of a sudden, it's talking about the attitude of young people. Young people today, their screens are sacred, and there's the word this. The young people have been hearing this forever. So that's the pivot point. But what does this refer to? Is it just they've been hearing the Iliad forever, or is it something else? And have they been hearing? Don't even go there. But have they been hearing the Iliad one by one?
I think.
Don't even answer that. I just want you to talk about this turn.
This turn, right. There was a sense of stepping back and thinking, you know, here I'm talking about this 2,700-year-old poem, and hasn't that been around forever? And what do, you know, I sort of, in writing about the Iliad, I kind of make myself old, besides personally, I mean, but and so, and there is some sense, well, what about contemporary people? And so there is some sense, well, this has been going on a long time. And the possible impatience of young people with this. But then I do switch, and that line that I was talking about before, nobody can see all that much of anything. I connected this imaginary crowd peering into the golden fog with our contemporary, especially younger people, staring into their phone screens,
right.
Which they do obsessively, as if they can't possibly get enough of what they can't see very clearly. It has to all be new.
And they might be looking at porn, which is pretty much
they might be looking at the primal scene. That's right. So, well, I suppose, listen, we have to, because of time, we're very close.
I'm going to do another poem.
So I'm going to do my second poem. And this is the one of the Jack and Jilly kind of poems. And in this poem, I should say that I actually quote that the nursery rhyme, Jack and Jill. One reason I do it is that I suddenly, as I was finishing up this book, I had this worry. It's a similar worry to audiences not knowing the Iliad. Well, I thought, well, what if people don't know the words to Jack and Jill? Then what sense does this poem make? So I wanted to include the words in the poem. Okay, glass half full. They say Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water without a thought in the world of who might be up there already, involved as they were with each other's detail. To fetch a pail of water, that's the empty bucket swinging, which they're probably taking turns carrying, passing it back and forth, shy at the moment of transfer. When arousal begins, some faculties sharpen while others are dampened, to repeat what everyone knows. But none of our senses will be reliable guides for what they say happened next. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. Hardly what you'd call a triumphal second act. Breaking your crown never helps. Rivulets of trauma blotching down the hill, and nothing's going to work the same anymore. But what about Jill tumbling after? No mention in her case of any head trauma, and doesn't tumbling suggest she's something of an acrobat with the ability to accommodate to upside down situations? And doesn't that hold out hope that we can develop portable scales for weighing unlike things?
Yeah, well, this poem very much brings together things we think of as unlike. I mean, we don't think of epic poetry as belonging with nursery rhymes. You do things, I think, and you might want to talk about this, you do things throughout to try to bring them together. Like I noticed that they're going up the hill with no thought of who might already be up there, you know. So there might be a city that you might want to sack.
Throughout the book, I mean, Troy is up on a hill.
Like, unlike, of course.
Yeah.
So if likeness and unlikeness, which is what you said about me too, if they are themes here, then at the end you make this, again, this kind of leap into the more speculative, and you introduce the idea that what we really need, if Jack and Jill are going to have these different fates, what we really need is something that, quote, holds out hope that we can develop portable scales for weighing unlike things. So what are those unlike things, and why do we need to weigh them?
Well, my sense there is I'm trying to suggest very large ethical concerns, and how do you weigh honor versus happiness, money versus nutrition, or but how do you weigh eroticism versus good government? All sorts of different things that we need to be able to keep track of our actions in very complex ways, and it's not always just a question of how much does something cost, or most of our conundrums are based on having to bring unlike things together, and then how do we decide and act on those. And so that's that. And a portable scale, I guess I was thinking of some sort of device that isn't high tech, but is just really simple, but you can bring it to many different situations. So that tumbling at the end, and I'm punning, of course, on tumbling and then gymnastics tumbling, but that holds out hope that we can be flexible and accommodate ourselves to the complexities that we're making for ourselves.
Well, at least Jill can. I just want to say before we close that in both of these poems you read, the female gets the upper hand.
Well, it is funny, I should say, and I know we're way out of time. That the Homer that I see in the Iliad, I sort of make him into an anti-war poet and something of a feminist, which is a bit of going against the grain. Well,
I think we should say our goodbyes, and we need to thank the San Diego Book Fair for inviting us. So thank you, and thank you to their sponsors, the San Diego Council on Literacy. Please visit literacysandiego.org and support literacy for all.
And I just want to say that we've been doing this for decades, but it's always a pleasure to talk about poetry with you, Ray.
Yeah, I know, it's been so fun. And there'll be a link at the end where you can check out our books and maybe find a local bookstore.
Okay, I think we now say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Hello, my name is Jose Cruz. I'm the CEO for the San Diego Council on Literacy. Our mission is to unite the community to support literacy. We represent a network of 30 youth, adult, and family literacy programs that annually serve 180,000 residents of all ages at no cost. We're very excited about the upcoming San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books taking place on Saturday, August 29th, 2020, and we're glad to be a partner and glad to be a part of what's taking place on that day. We hope that you'll join us and come together with the rest of the community to enjoy and celebrate reading.